Well, hello and good evening to all of you. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to be part of this class and to share with you the Dharma that has been so precious and important in my life. I want to thank KTD Monastery for putting on the class, as well as all of the lamas who have worked so hard to prepare their materials and to give instruction for this class. I would also like to say a word of thanks for our host, Yunten. I really appreciate your help these many weeks, as well as Angelica and both Lama Sonam and Lama Mark, who have acted as our interpreters for this class. It's wonderful that all of you were part of what we would call our maiden voyage of a new ship, the maiden voyage of Dharma Paths program. So thank you for joining. We'll start this evening with our prayers. And since this is class number 10, I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen here. And we'll, let's see, here we go. And we'll recite the prayers that have been recited since the beginning of the class. Okay, let's see, here we go. We'll start with the Mahamudra lineage supplication. And we'll dedicate this class to all suffering beings, making the aspiration that through our attending and being part of this class, may all beings be free from suffering and come to Buddhahood. I'll do my best to recite it in a melody that you can follow. O doje chanchen te lo na ro dang marpa mila chu je gam po pa du sun she cha kun kien karma pa che shi chung je ju pa zin nam dam Drita sao sun pal den pa so sablam cha cha che la ngan ye pe Nyame droken da po ka jula so wadep so ka jula banam Jupa zin ho nam tar chin ji lo shen lo bom ki kam par song pa shen zenor kula cha shen me padang se dir du ta chư pe gong chen la ni ko jen pa me pa jin ji lo me gu gong ki go war song pa jen me nga te ko je pe lam ha la jun du so wa de pe gong chen la chu min mu ku ke wa jin ji lo yang mei gong ki ngu shi song pa zhen gang sha to pe ngo wo so ma de ma chu de ka jo pe gong chen la Gom cha lo dan drao hua jin ji lo nam tong o wo ju kur song pa yin ji yang ma yin ji yan char wa la ma ga ro pa char wei gong chen la ho de yem he to pa jin ji lo ke wa kun tu yan ta la ma dang Dra me chu ki pa la long chu cheng sa da lang hi yen ten rab so ne do je chan ji go pa nyer to show do che chang ki go pa nyer to show. Next, we'll recite Refuge in Bodhicitta, which is recited 3 times. Or sanje chudang soji chonam la chang chu pardu dani kyapsu chi taji jin soji pe sunam ki drola penshir sanje drupar shor Sanjay chudang soji chonam la Changchu pardu dani kyapsu che Daji jin soji pe sunam ki Drola penshir Sanjay drupar sho Sanjay chudang sochi chonam la Changchu pardu dani kyapsu che Daji jin soji pe sunam ki Drola penshir Sanjay drupar sho. Now the prayer of the 4 immeasurables, which is also recited 3 times. Samchen tamche dewa tan dewe gyutan tenpar gyurchik dungao tan dungao gi chutan trewar chuchik dungam hepe dewa tampa tam hindrewar chuchik nerin chantan yidan drawe tonyen chenpola nepar jurchik Samchen tamche dewa dan dewe gyutan tenpar gyurchik dungal tam dungal gi chutan drawa chuchik dungal hepe dewa tampa tam vindrawar chuchik nerin chantan yidan drawe tonyen chenpola nepar jurchik Samchen tamche dewa tan dewe gyutan tenpar gyurchik dunga tan dunga gi jutan trawa chuchik dunga hepe dewa tampa tam hindrawa chuchik nerin chantan yidan drawe tonyen chenpola nepar jurchik Chaksawadan Jichin Shapadan Jesu Yirang Kajin Sohayi Kewa Chunze Dagi Jisapa Tamche Dagi Chanchu Chingo. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks again for making this part of your evening for so many weeks. It's wonderful to be part of this class with you. So now we are at class number 10, the last in the first series. I hope you have seen in your emails and online. The second group of courses will begin in a few weeks, and we're really looking forward to presenting those to you as well. So you've learned about the basics. You've learned about the life of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. You've learned about the place of meditation and how to do quiet sitting meditation. You've learned about the indwelling Buddha nature within us all, and about some of the techniques and practices that will help to nurture and bring out our Buddha mind. So then that brings us to this evening, where the topic is compassion meditation. In the years that I have been teaching for students at the Karma Teksum Choling centers, this practice of compassion meditation has always been part of our class. And the reason for this is that the founder of our center, Khenpo Kartha Rinpoche, said that compassion meditation was very important for our development in the Dharma. He said that shamatha meditation is a good beginning, and it is a good foundation. And we will be doing shamatha meditation really for the rest of our Buddhist lives. But shamatha, he said, while it can pacify mental afflictions, he said it does not uproot mental afflictions. And so he said for the uprooting of mental afflictions, he said we will need the other skillful means of Buddhism. Now, you may wonder a little bit about this, because many people tell me that when they start doing shamatha meditation, they begin to notice that their emotional reactions and mental afflictions actually begin to lessen. But what Khenpo Rinpoche said is, even though these negative mental afflictions are somewhat pacified through the practice of shamatha, he said they are not completely removed. Why? He said because the seeds of those mental afflictions, which are in our self, how do I want to put this? Our self-fixation, the self-fixation that we have, the ego clinging and ego grasping that we experience as a human being, and that gives rise to the powerful seeds of karma that give rise to even more mental afflictions. So in other words, as long as ego grasping remains below the surface of our thinking, as long as ego fixation lies below the surface of our thinking, then that ego fixation will give rise to more and more and more mental afflictions and emotional reactions. So in that way, it is very similar to a type of weed that grows above the earth, but has a very long root below the earth. So that if you cut the weed at the ground level, you'll think, oh, okay, so now the weed is gone. But when the rain comes, then instantly a new weed will grow because the root remains below the ground. And so in order to take that weed out of your garden, you have to dig and then pull the weed out by the root. So it's the same with our mental afflictions. We may pacify them at the surface, but below we still have ego fixation, which gives rise to these mental afflictions. So we have to take action to counteract ego fixation. So how do we do that? Well, the teachings of the Buddha offer the practice of bodhicitta. Bodhi, B-O-D-H-I, bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, bodhi means awakening, citta means mind. And it means it is the mind that wants to awaken. It has two aspects. relative bodhicitta, which is love and compassion, and ultimate bodhicitta, which is wisdom and emptiness. It is very difficult to understand ultimate bodhicitta right away. Wisdom and emptiness can be a little bit tricky to understand. But love and compassion are very easy to understand, and therefore we should spend most of our time, my teacher said, we should spend most of our time practicing and training our mind in love and training our mind in compassion. Now you might say, well, doesn't love and compassion come naturally to us as human beings? Why should we have to train in something that comes so naturally? Well, Rinpoche said that the reason for this is because we have a limited amount of love and compassion right now, because we are not enlightened beings. So since we are not enlightened beings yet, there are those beings, whether they're human, animal, or whatever, who exist outside the fence of our love and compassion. And these beings that exist outside the fence of our love and compassion are beings we could potentially harm. So right now, our love and compassion is very limited only to those we care for and we feel are close to us. We have no love and no compassion for those who are distant or maybe antagonistic toward us. So now we have to do our best to train our mind to go beyond our current limit. Go beyond our current limit and train in having love and compassion even for those who have caused harm. So this is a very difficult practice. So we need to use the skillful means of Buddhism in order to practice this. The Bodhisattva Sutra, for example, says that if you want to really train in bodhicitta, you would give your body to other sentient beings and let them eat you, such as when the Buddha, as a bodhisattva on the Bhumis, gave his body to a hungry tigress so that she could feed her cubs. Well, that's not going to be something we're asked to do right now, he said. He said, we will not be asked to give that much right now. He said, we will be asked to give as we are capable and when we are capable. And so slowly and gradually over time, we will be encouraged to give more and more. So we are not going to be giving our body to tigresses anytime soon, but perhaps we will be a little more patient with the person next door, or maybe we'll be a little more patient with our partner, or we'll be a little more patient with the people who work with us or are in school with us. So the idea is that hopefully through training the mind in love and compassion, we will be able to eventually give more to sentient beings than we are now capable of giving. So Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, in one of his teachings about this, he said, he said, how did he put it? He said, we should recognize, he said, that the mental happiness that we have, he said, does not come from an external source. It's internal in origin. And we should see that this internal happiness is really the ultimate happiness. If one is always feeling aggressive and is filled with greed or other negative emotions, we're unable to experience any inner happiness, even if our external conditions are good. I think everyone here has known someone who, although maybe they're very wealthy and so on, they're very unhappy. And whereas you've also known people who did not have a lot of resources, but they have a great deal of inner happiness. And so this is an example of what Khenpo Rinpoche is talking about. He said that the remedy to not having enough love and compassion, and the remedy for aggressiveness and for attachment, he said, is to develop true love and compassion, which destroy hate and other mental afflictions. And he said the reason this is possible is because attachment, aggression, and all of the other conflicting emotions come from grasping toward a self, the concept of self, or I, or me. And he says, since we're preoccupied with this me or I, we might forget about other beings. He said, but when we have true love and true compassion, we will be less concerned with our own needs and begin to become more concerned with the needs of others. I remember one time a student said, well, I love my children very much. And are you saying that I should love my children less? And Khenpo Rinpoche said, I am not asking you to love your children less. I am asking you to love everybody else more. So the idea is that if Buddha nature is real and we really have an innate capacity to feel boundless love and compassion, if this is within all of us, then we need to gradually come to believe in this. And the way to come to believe in this is through training. So Khenpo Rinpoche said that when we train our mind in love and compassion, he said it even eliminates ignorance. He says, because he said, with the absence of anger and attachment, it is easier to come to know our own Buddha nature, our own Buddha mind. And then he said, in that case, if we come to know and personify our Buddha nature more, then we will actually begin to know how to help other beings. I think everyone has experienced this at least once. You see someone suffering and you really want to help, but you don't know what to do. And so what Rinpoche is saying is that if we train the mind in love and compassion, then we will naturally know how to help others. Now, Rinpoche said when we talk about becoming selfless or becoming more selfless, people get a little bit frightened, because he said they think that by loving other people more, that they themselves will not take care of themselves. But that's not the case. He said, becoming a real bodhisattva doesn't mean that you won't take care of yourself, but it means that you will be able to care for both yourself and others without clinging. You see, many of us, he said, we say that we love those who are close to us. He said, but for many of us, he said, it's not really love. What we're calling love, he said, is more of a business transaction. If people do the things we like, then we say we love them. But if the people stop doing the things we like, if they go against our wish, well, then we don't love them anymore. And he said, this is not real love. He said, this is business. So he said, we have to train to overcome this notion of clinging and self. And so he said, what we're really trying to do is train our habits, because our habits are what are there. He said, Khenpo Rinpoche said that the habits we have in this life are like a container that contain who we are and how we express ourselves, what we learn, what we become. And so he said, in this life, all we are doing is making habits. Now, in Tibetan, the word for this is bak which in English is spelled Bakchak, Bakchak, this habit that we are forming around ourselves is first very selfish and very grasping toward. We take on this, we have a new habit. We are no longer just a confused sentient being. We are still now we are training to be bodhisattvas of the past. And this habit, this new identity around us when we begin to practice.
Lama Kathy, you appear to be breaking up, and your screen has gone black.
Or seriously, now do about that. Let's see.
You're back.
If maybe we have. I am in a rural part of Ohio, out in the woods, which is kind of where I am right now. Up and down to stop for a moment while the internet caught up with me. Thank you. So the practice of Tonglen is what we're going to talking about this evening. Learned it before, so this will be you for you. And for some of you, this may be, there are so many textbooks, so many textbooks, Tonglen meditation. I am going to show a couple of them to you right here. This is a book called Start Where You Are. See if I can put it closer to you. No, you cannot see it. It is Start Where You Are by children. And this book came Trungpa Rinpoche. And many of you will also be familiar with the Natural Rinpoche, which also teaches about Tonglen. But to the Great Path of Awakening, I'm going to control Jotai in your materials so that you can see them all and be able to read them. The Great Path of Awakening is my favorite, and Kim Carter Rinpoche said, he said, you can't make a mistake. So that's my 10-second commercial for this book. Now, I'm going to teach Tonglen from a completely different book. I didn't even bring but I am going to teach it from the book Dharma Rinpoche, the one that is advertised. The reason I'm teaching from this is that it is the most simple practice I have ever encountered. And see of thinking, not a lot of contemplation. You just sit down, do a little shamatha, and then practice. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to share with you this teaching. And then we'll see how it goes, okay? And then we'll talk a little bit about how this practice can be used in everyday life. Okay, here we go. Oh, thanks very much. These are appearing. Thank you so much. Yunten is showing in in the chat, the links to the books. Thank you so much. Okay, let's take a look at the instruction. Let's see here. Okay. It's going to take a second for me to come to it. Have you had a day where everything is a little mischievous today? Everything is a little mischievous today. Some of the things that I want to do are somewhere. So we're just going to look it up and put it in. It is. Wow. Hey, this is really. Okay, there's supplement. Well, guess what? We're not going to be able to find it. So I am going to have to read it to you from the book. I apologize for the delay. Of my material, including this one. And it did not show up. Okay, here we go. Translators, this hopefully, because it'll be on screen, but maybe not. We'll see if it works. To Dharma paths itself. Kemper Bache in his explains how to do Tonglen. And so here he says, in addition to gaining an intellectual understanding of bodhicitta, he says it's important to have a practical experience of the practice. He said, to that end, there is the practice known as Tonglen. And he said that will help you to develop the enlightened attitude. Let's see. Then he says, when you do this short meditation, he said, first sit in meditation posture, relaxing and sitting comfortably, then breathing normally. You breathe normally, following the natural course of your breath. He said, imagine that with the exhalation of your breath, merit you have accumulated from the beginning time, are accumulating now, and will accumulate future times. It radiates out toward all sentient beings. Just as when the sun shines, the rays of toward all places. So with your exhalation, these positive qualities radiate, bringing happiness, well-being, comfort, health, and longevity to all beings without discrimination. Then, when you breathe in, you bring in the suffering, the confusion, the sickness, turmoil, and the suffering and turmoil of sentient beings merges with you, and this uproots the suffering, confusion in beings. Now, here's the key point. This is important. He says, because of the strength of bodhicitta, of your sincere attitude of wanting to benefit beings, as soon as the suffering merges with you, it dissolves into nothing. It's as if you had collected some dust together into a little pile, and a strong blew it away. Breathing in and breathing out in this way, he said, you meditate for a short time. Then he said, after you have meditated this way for a while, he said, let go of the mental focus and let your mind rest in a state of awareness. He said, attempt to have the sense that there are no sentient beings to meditate on. There is no person meditating. There is no act of meditation taking place. He says, try to transcend these three, which are relative, and give birth to something ultimate, something effortless and spontaneous, like the arising and disappearing of clouds in the sky. He said, just remain in a state of clarity. He said, there's no act, no thought of doing something outside or inside, no you doing something. Just cut off all of that and remain in a state of awareness. And he said, in order to give birth to bodhicitta, we must accumulate merit or positive qualities on the relative level and also on the absolute level. He said the desire to benefit beings accumulates merit on the relative or physical level, since we think of doing this in a substantial or physical way. We imagine all sentient beings everywhere. We generate love toward all the beings and think of helping them in this way. We generate compassion toward all the beings, thinking of taking away their suffering and confusion. Then the inner aspect of the accumulation comes through developing wisdom, which transcends any point. Wisdom that in ultimate reality, the practice transcends any idea of other beings on whom we need to focus. The self is the one who is focusing and the very act of. So this is the basic teaching on Tonglen well-being. The reason I like this particular presentation is because it is so simple. And it allows us to use our imagination to expand our love and compassion. Remember, I said that the reason that we have to train is because right now there are beings that are outside the fence of our love and compassion. And so we have to use our imagination to expand that. And using this visualization that as we breathe, we send goodness to all beings. This includes all beings equally. In fact, we would call them our mothers. That's because this book and Angelica Medaglia book, The Great Path.
Lama Kathy, your audio is breaking up really badly, and we have no video of you.
Being this you says
We can't hear anything you're saying.
any of I know what to should we change to a different network?
If you have access to a different
Let's try
network, would
that.
do that.
Let's try that.
In the meantime, I am sending a link to Dharma Path's book, which I did not include before. That's in the chat.
Still not working?
I hear you.
You
I don't
can hear
see a
me?
video. I don't see video, so that's
Okay.
a little disconcerting.
Yeah, I know. But you can hear me all right, right?
Yes, we can hear you better now.
Okay. I'm sorry you can't see me, but you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, then maybe even if you can't see me, you can imagine me.
Now we can see. Now I can see you.
All right, very good. Well, we'll see if this helps. I am, like I say, I am out in the, I'm out in the sticks, and I have 2 bars of service. The dedicated Wi-Fi, of the place where I am is probably having a lot of demand right now. So I switched to my cell phone to tether my cell phone in hopes that that would help with it. So we'll see if that helps. So we'll pick up where we left off, which is talking about training the mind in love by using our imagination to expand the circle of those who we do our practice for. And this also helps us because many people tell me the biggest hurdle to them doing Tonglen is that they're afraid that by even using their imagination to imagine taking on the suffering of others, that somehow they will cause themselves harm. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that because the suffering that we are taking on is imaginary suffering, that it is not possible for that suffering to harm us. He said, as an example, a gentleman asked about this, and he said, well, let's do an experiment right here, right now. He said to the gentleman, he said, please imagine an imaginary sandwich in your hand. And the guy imagined it, and he said, okay, now take a bite out of this imaginary sandwich. And then he said, chew it up real good. And then he said, now, did that imaginary sandwich satisfy your hunger? And the man said, well, of course not. It's imaginary sandwich. It's an imaginary sandwich. And he said, that's right. And it's imaginary suffering. He said, if you can use your imagination, he said, to expand your capacity, he said, you will be doing yourself a very big favor. He said, whereas if you don't do a training practice like Tonglen, if you don't do any training in love or compassion, your ego fixation will continue to harm you by causing mental afflictions that will cause karmic accumulation that will go lifetime after lifetime after lifetime without end. He said, you will have more harm come to you from not trying these methods than if you try them. So I thought that was a very interesting argument. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was a master of debate. He was very good at working with people. So this is a concern that we can overcome through using our imagination. But if people have a real difficulty with this, it's fine if you just want to send love to sentient beings and not remove their suffering. It's fine to just send the love on the out-breath and practice Tonglen in that way until you feel more ready to do the sending as well as the receiving. It's fine to do it that way as a training method. And there are many other ways to practice Tonglen, including with your own mental afflictions. You can actually use Tonglen in your everyday life to work with your own anger, your own sadness, your own suffering. But that's for a little bit later in the class. I think now we should do a little bit of practice. We should try to do a little bit of practice and see how this works for us, okay? So I'm going to encourage everyone to take a moment and get to a comfortable sitting position. And then I'm going to read these instructions to you. the ones we just reviewed. And I will go very slowly through them. So we'll start with a bodhisattva intention that we will do this practice for the benefit of all suffering beings. We'll start with that intention. Having started with that intention, we'll follow our breath. We'll do a little breath awareness meditation to begin with, about a minute or so of quiet sitting, being aware of the breath as it comes in, being aware of the breath as it goes out. Now I'm going to share little by little Khenpo Rinpoche's teaching on Tonglen. He says, imagine that with the exhalation of your breath, whatever merit you have accumulated in the past are accumulating now and will accumulate in the future, radiates outward from you toward all sentient beings. Just as when the sun shines, the rays of light radiate toward all places. So with your exhalation, these positive qualities radiate. On each out-breath. Each out-breath brings happiness, well-being, comfort, health, and longevity to all beings without discrimination. So let's spend just a moment being with our out-breath, thinking that we're sending goodness to all sentient beings. Then, when you breathe in, imagine on your in-breath, you take the suffering, the confusion, the sickness, and the turmoil of sentient beings into you, and all of the suffering of sentient beings merges with you, and this uproots the suffering and confusion of sentient beings. However, because of the strength of bodhicitta, the power of your sincere attitude of wanting to benefit beings, as soon as the suffering merges with you, the suffering dissolves into nothing and it disappears. He said, it says, just as if you had collected some dust together into a little pile and a strong wind blew it away. So he said, then as you breathe in, you think of removing suffering, it meets your bodhisattva motivation, it dissolves into nothing and disappears, and then you breathe out again, giving goodness to sentient beings. So we'll do that now for just a little while. Breathing out goodness to all sentient beings, breathing in and removing suffering from all sentient beings, watching that suffering merge with us, dissolve into nothing, and disappear. So we'll do that for about a minute. Okay, next, the meditation concludes like this. Rinpoche said, at this point, you let go of the mental focus. In other words, you let the visualization go and let your mind rest in a state of quiet awareness. He said, attempt to have the sense that there are no sentient beings to meditate on, there is no person meditating, and there is no act of meditation taking place. He said, try to transcend these three, which are relative, and give birth to something ultimate, something effortless and spontaneous, like the arising and disappearing of clouds in the sky. Just remain in a state of clarity. There is no act, no thought of doing something outside or inside, no you doing something. He said, just let go of all of that and remain in a state of awareness. So we'll do this phase of the meditation now for a minute or so. Okay, this concludes the short practice of Tonglen. Now I know we're going to have a Q&A next week, but I would like to take about 10 minutes right now. I know it might be unusual, but I would like to take about 10 minutes, and I'll set my timer right now to answer any questions that might have come up as you were learning this method. If anybody has a question, you can type it into the chat. And it's okay if there are no questions. I just thought I would check. Okay, let's see. Okay. All right. Just wanted to offer that chance. The person is saying, found it easier to visualize particular suffering. Oh, there are some questions. Here we go. All right, let's see. Found it easier to visualize particular suffering of individuals I know rather than all beings. And that's really common. Kemper Rinpoche said you can start with particular beings, but then he said you can imagine, eventually imagine others who are not so close to you. And everybody is a little different. It is a little easier to imagine the people you know. he said that, but he said the one problem with visualizing people you know is that you think you know what's good for them. But it takes a little effort to just give them whatever it is that they need. So the idea, he said, it's fine to do this practice for people that you know. He said, as long as you eventually, in the same session, expand it outward to include all beings. Because again, it's not that you want to love your dear ones less, you want to imagine loving others more. So that's not uncommon. So thanks for sharing that. I often find my mind jumping from one kind of suffering to another. Should I just do one at a time? You know, I think that is also something that comes up because Khenpo Rinpoche said that because Tonglen is a form of shamatha, because Tonglen is a form of awareness, you know, this attention building meditation, it's a form of shamatha. So the kinds of problems that you have with shamatha, you will also have with Tonglen. And so the mind jumping from one thing to another, is that, I think that's actually okay, because the idea is that there are so many beings and there is so many types of suffering. I think it's not a problem, just as it's not a problem to look at one grape as opposed to a bunch of grapes, as long as you're not like trying to decide which one to eat and you can't decide. So as long as you're able to immediately meet all of those kinds of suffering with with your love, you should be all right. Let's see. Let's see. I know we don't, here's a question. I know we don't really take on suffering when we do Tonglen, but is there benefit to really trying to imagine? Isn't it more beneficial that way? Yes, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that people will do Tonglen in accordance to their own development, because some people they prefer it to be a little easier, and then some of the other people want it to be sort of like the easier way is to think of it as just being generic suffering and generic happiness and so forth, without any kind of detail. But imagining that you're really taking it on, sure, I see no problem with that. But it's but again, we can't think that we're superior to others. You know, as long as our method of practice doesn't increase our self-fixation, we're probably okay. But if our method of doing the practice makes us more fixated, or we think that we're better than others, then it's a little problematic. But I would say that it's, you know, it's, let's see. Yeah, it's the idea is that you would, Khenpo Rinpoche used the words, you would want to do it, even though you can't right now. He said, if you could, you would want to take it on. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but he said it's he said these things you develop them over time. Yeah, you know, I'm trying to remember. Someone was once saying to him, "Oh, you know, I don't know that I want to do this." And he said, "Well, this is your imagination." He said, "You aren't really capable." He said, "But you should want to develop the capacity." Because really think about it, guys. Once we become first level bodhisattvas, then he said we're actually going to be able to take on the sufferings of others and deal with it at the same time, because we're going to have the awakening to deal with that. But until then, we can't. But he never explained that more or in a further way. So I wish there was more I could say about it, but that's all I know. Now here is another person. If you breathe in others' suffering before you can transmute it, can you get sick? Khenpo Rinpoche said no, because he said it is imaginary suffering. And since it's imaginary suffering, it's not going to harm you any more than that imaginary sandwich was going to satisfy the man's hunger. So he said, however, he said, there is a situation, he said, where people who experience intense fear of getting sick from doing Tonglen, that he said the fear could actually make them sick. There is no way the suffering could make them sick, but their fear of the suffering could make them sick. So he said in that particular case, that person should take it easy and not try to push themselves too hard. Because he said you have to work with where you are. And if where you are is in a place of fear, well, then that's okay. You have to accept that. And what you could do, and it might be a possible good thing for you to do, is to imagine yourself as the person you're meditating for, breathing out reassurance and love to yourself, and breathing in and removing your fear on the in-breath, breathing out and giving yourself goodness on that out-breath, and breathing in and removing your fear on the in-breath. But don't worry, if you have that kind of fear, it's okay. You'll slowly work it out by only doing the out-breath, only giving happiness on the out-breath. And then I think over time, the development of the merit and goodness that comes from giving happiness to others will eventually allow you to do it. So hopefully that's helpful. Is this an appropriate technique? I think so, because Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche taught it in his book, Dharma Paths. So I think it's an appropriate technique. There's so many different techniques for how to do Tonglen. So this is my favorite beginning level, because you don't have to do a lot of lengthy contemplation first. Jamgon Kongtrul in the Great Path of Awakening has a person do a very lengthy contemplation about one's mother, and then imagining that one's mother has taken care of one, and how much love you feel for your mother. But that doesn't always work for people, because sometimes they have conflict with their mothers. And so it's easier for them to express love and compassion for someone other than her. So there are all kinds of different ways this can be done. Then it says, for an example, all beings who have anxieties, all beings who hunger, all beings, yes, experiencing pain. Yes, that could be done. Here's another question. How much time do we have? Oh, we have another minute or two, so I can take 2 more questions. Let's see. It says, hi, what's the Tonglen technique for imagining in black smoke while exhaling and white smoke as a way of purifying suffering? Oh yeah, this is very interesting. This is how Pema Chodron teaches it in Start Where You Are. She teaches it that as you breathe out, it's like white light. And as you breathe in, it's like black smoke. And I have to tell you, I have run into so many people for whom that's a problem. They say that it's associating like blackness with suffering and whiteness with happiness, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. And you know what? It's okay for that. And I asked Khenpo Rinpoche, well, how do I work with this? And he said, you don't need to teach it that way. He said, just teach it as happiness, giving out happiness and removing suffering. He said, you don't have to use colors. It's okay. And so I thought that was really a very perceptive response on his part. But yes, there is a method for doing that. And it's also described in detail in the Great Path of Awakening for doing it that way. And if you have developed your practice doing it that way, that's perfectly fine. But I do want to offer Khenpo Rinpoche's method as an option for people for whom that's a little more complex. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Okay, this will be the last question, I think, because I don't know that we have enough time. Let's see. Is it okay to do Tonglen for someone you know and for all those who suffer in the same way? Yes, Jared. And by the way, hi. Yes, it's absolutely okay. And here's the way Rinpoche said you could do that. He said you begin the practice by breathing out happiness and goodness to that person and breathing in and removing their suffering. And then he said, after you've done that for a short time, he said, a very short time, doesn't have to be long at all. Then he said, you expand outward to everyone who feels the same way. And then finally, all sentient beings. He said, even if you start with one being, he said, it's best to end with all beings so that your compassion, you can use your imagination to expand your compassion as big as the universe. Because one of my teachers, it wasn't Khenpo Rinpoche, one of my teachers said, our mental afflictions seem to be limitless. So shouldn't, and our wantingness and desires seem to be limitless. So why can't our love and compassion also be limitless? So I thought that was a really good call out, really good thought. So yeah, and so he said the same thing if you do it for yourself. For example, you might be a person who maybe you've had a really hard day and maybe you're suffering from compassion fatigue at work. Maybe you work in the helping professions or something, and you're really tired or exhausted. Rinpoche said it's fine to do the practice for yourself as a way of sort of refilling, yourself. But he said you continue to expand to everyone who feels like you, and then to all sentient beings eventually. And he said, but also he said, don't do it for one other person in your life too much. He said, because that could actually gradually increase your clinging and fixation toward that one person. So I thought that was a very interesting observation on Rinpoche's part. But something about Rinpoche, such a genius in teaching. He knew our humanity, right? he knew how complex we were as human beings. So it's like that. Okay. I keep saying it's the last question, but there's one more. Okay, this one absolutely will be the last question because I do have to talk about daily life Tonglen. And I want to be able to have that in the class. Is it ego building to have full faith in the technique as if the relative you can do the practice, but I see, the relative you can do the practice, but the ultimate view is doing the actual transmutation and elimination of the suffering. I'll tell you what, I think that's a little too complicated. I think that's making the practice a little too complicated. I think it's better to use a slightly different technique to do that. Here's an example. If you have to think about all of the layers of you and all of the layers, the relative and the ultimate layer, it's a little too complicated. Why don't we just do the practice of Tonglen with sincerity while observing our mind doing the practice? This is how Mingyur Rinpoche teaches his students to do it. He says, if you're a practitioner of Mahamudra or of open awareness practice, meditation practice, if you practice one of those kinds of practices, he said you can observe your mind as you're doing the practice while fully doing the practice. I think that's a little easier. It's a little more relaxing, a little less mental gymnastic, that kind of thing. So I think trying to keep it a little more on the simple side, I think would be good, And it is a good idea to do some shamatha. I think it is really good to do some shamatha at the beginning. Okay, great. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you. Okay, so we'll have to close the questions for now because I have a couple of more things I'd like to talk to you about. The Khenpo Rinpoche, when he was teaching about Tonglen in Columbus at our center a number of years ago, he said, Tonglen is not just something you should do when you're sitting on your cushion. It's not just something you should do sitting on your cushion. He said, you should take it with you and carry it with you everywhere. He said, for example, You can think as you walk through the day, you can think, may every being be happy. May every being be free of suffering, and so on. And by thinking in this way, he said, even your walking becomes beneficial. There's and then he said, when you feel a negative mental affliction, such as you feel suffering, or you feel sadness, or you feel anger, he said, you can actually pause and think about all sentient beings in the universe who are feeling exactly the same way you feel right now. And then you can imagine taking on all of their suffering and the suffering that you have, which I think is really amazing, right? And in fact, there is a slogan that addresses this, and it's in the Great Path of Awakening. And I'll show you. I'm going to put on screen a short explanation of this. Let's see if I can make that happen. Let's see, share screen. I think this is it here. There we go. And when we're faced with pain and suffering and adverse circumstances or mental affliction, the way it's explained in the Great Path of Awakening is to take a moment to identify how you're feeling. In a way, we're being asked to take one step back from the story that we are telling ourselves about what is happening. For example, we might think that person said something that hurt my feelings. I am angry about that. Well, if you stop for a moment, if you take a time out, if you stop briefly and identify the feeling of anger, then you will actually be able to use this technique. Because once you identify how you are feeling, you can use a formula that was written in the teachings of Jamgon Khantrul the Great to transform the feeling into an aspiration to overcome all mental afflictions for the benefit of yourself and the greater world of sentient beings. I tell people to try reciting this formula to themselves once a day, every day, and try to practice it once a day with some kind of negative mental feeling. And after a few months, you might find that you memorized the formula and that you will have some ability to use it when difficult things arise. So here's the formula. May my difficult emotion, whatever it is, my anger, my sadness, my jealousy, my disappointment, may it contain the difficult emotion of all sentient beings. And through my working through this moment of difficult emotion, by my being able to be present with this, may I and all beings be free of such painful emotions. And may we become Buddhas, the complete freedom from these difficult emotions. And so the idea here is that we start with the feeling, and then, which is very self-focused, my anger, my jealousy, my being hurt. And then we say, I want to go beyond this. I want to imagine that that all of this is transformed into awakening. So the idea is, by thinking in this way, may my difficult emotion, oh, I did my own editing there, that's very cute, contain the difficult emotion of all sentient beings. By my working through this moment, May I and all beings be free. And may we all become Buddhas, the complete freedom from this. So it's like the negative mental affliction is raw material that you are taking and changing the shape of. Think of clay, which you have a lump of clay. It looks like an ugly rock until you transform it into a beautiful swan. So let's take this ugly rock of our anger, this ugly clay of our jealousy, and then turn it into something beautiful, this aspiration for Buddhahood. This is something that we can do. So I want to share this with all of you because this one technique that Rinpoche taught us so many years ago really changed my life. And I'm hoping that by sharing it with all of you, it will help you also. It's very important that we have practical ways to apply these teachings. And so this is why I wanted to make sure that I shared this part with you. I think that you can even, what Rinpoche said, it's really interesting. I'm sorry that I don't have this particular, let's see if I do have this particular. Yeah, I actually do have this one. There's an article that's on my website on lamakathy.net it's actually notes from a teaching that Khenpo Rinpoche gave many years ago. But he said something really interesting in this. He must have known what we were all thinking. He says when we're training the mind as beginners, we still have a lot of neurosis and a lot of neurotic thoughts, but we must know how to handle them. And if we can handle them this way, we can turn our conflicting emotions into a cause for virtue. And he said, this is why we apply mindfulness. He said, the moment you're aware that you're experiencing anger, we should think, well, may I experience the negative emotion of all sentient beings, and may all beings be free of that. Then he said, the emotion itself is not positive, but the way you handled it is positive, and you have actually accumulated merit. Now, here's one that I really liked. Similarly, when you make a mistake out of confusion, oh, have I ever given myself a hard time because I made a mistake? I don't know if you ever done this. Oh my goodness. You could give yourself a hard time. He says, when you make a mistake out of confusion, instead of giving yourself a hard time, you should accept the mistake and realize that it arises from confusion that come from negative karma. Think, everybody has made these mistakes. So now I take on all of their confusion. So even if you make a mistake out of confusion, that mistake can become an object of virtue. I had to share that one with you because I know I make a lot of mistakes. Maybe you don't. So you might never need this one, but this one also helped me quite a lot. And in this way, by practicing like this, we can take compassion and love out of the idea, out of the realm of the imagination, and actualize it in our own life. So I think that's as far as I want to go today, with one exception. You can try this at home. When you wake up in the morning, that is a really good time to practice. If you have ever heard Lama Karma Drodol teach about this, he says when you wake up, you do wake up meditation. You think, wow, I'm not dead. I think, it's a good way to start your day. Oh, wow, I'm not dead. So he said, then be grateful for that and make the aspiration that you will use the day to be of benefit to others and to yourself. Then he said, if you do a little shamatha right there, still sitting in bed, he said, your mind will be very relaxed. And then you can take this attitude, may everything, and then, so that's his part. Now, my part is that I like to say this one thing to myself every morning. I say, may everything I do today, benefit beings in some way, meaning even if I make mistakes, even if I make a fool out of myself, may that be of benefit to beings, right? Because there are going to be parts of the day where you feel stupid. Maybe somebody's staring at you and you feel uncomfortable. Maybe, you know, somebody bumps into you on the street, or maybe somebody takes your coffee at the coffee shop. I mean, all kinds of things can happen, right? But if you think, may everything I do today be of benefit to beings in some way, that way we're dedicating everything, even our mistakes, to benefit beings. So it's like that. Then we can go through our day thinking things like, may all sentient beings be happy. May every being who sees me, bumps into me, talks to me, may they be connected to my guru and to the Buddha. May they have see something good of the Buddha in me. And may that benefit them. When you see suffering people, you imagine that maybe a Buddha blesses them. Maybe you don't have time to do Tonglen. You're not set up for it. Well, then you maybe will see the Buddha dissolve into them to bless them, or the medicine Buddha, or Chenrezig, or Tara, or whoever. And then at nighttime, when you get ready for bed, you can look at your day and you can say, well, how did I do? Okay, I did this thing right, I did this thing right, and I did this thing right. I rejoice in that. I rejoice in that. All that good that I did, I rejoice in it, and I dedicate it to all beings. And this thing that I did was not so good. This thing that I did was not so good. This thing not so good. I regret these things. And I pray to the Buddhas to purify these. And tomorrow I will do better. So and then as you go to sleep, you can think, okay, wherever I'm going tonight in my dreams, may I benefit sentient beings there. Lama Karma also has a going to sleep meditation where you imagine that your guru, made of light, is sitting in your heart. And I said, Rinpoche, imagining my guru sitting in my heart feels a little strange. I'm lying down. He said, that's no problem. He said, just imagine that your guru is made of light and he's lying down to sleep just like you. He was so wise and so good. And so he was able to allow all of us to have our quirks. Well, we have to stop here for tonight. And I'm sorry I can't take more questions, but we will have more questions next week. So if you have any questions from the classes, as many of the teachers as can be here next week will be here next week. And you can also, if you want to ask questions online, you can write to me at Lama Kathy at columbusktc.org. I may not be able to answer right away, but I might make a video where I answer all of your questions. That way it is a little easier than typing a long letter. So in any case, you guys have been amazing. And I'm really, really happy to have been a part of this class. I'm so glad we did the class, yeah? And I hope that your practice of compassion meditation will help to sort of, I don't know, I guess you could say, open your heart, open your eyes, to the goodness in yourself and all sentient beings. And that you can find that after you practice this for a while, if you can practice this a little bit every day, just a little bit of Tonglen. You don't have to do a lot. It doesn't have to be a long time. In fact, Khenpo Rinpoche, you saw that. He said it's a short meditation, just a short meditation. I would do it for 5 minutes or less, because if you try to do it for too long, then you get really confused and tired. So it's much easier to have it be short and genuine than long and get a little bit lost, So that's something to think about. So shall we pray? Shall we pray? I feel like a Christian minister sometimes. Is that a bad thing to say? Let's dedicate the goodness of our session to all sentient beings. And make the aspiration that they all find ways to be spiritually, mentally, and emotionally healthy, and that they find ways to be free from anger, fixation, and enmity. I'll recite these prayers with you. O Gyal Kun Ninje Razu Karma Pa Gyal Kun Trin Le Chi Du Karma Pa Gyal Kun Dun So Buang Kur Karma Pa Or General Do Trin Le Shap Ten So So Nam De Tam Che Zip Pa Ni Tob Ne Pedra Nam Pam Che Ne Ke Ga Na Chi Pa Lap Tru Pa Hi Si Pe So Le Tro An Yu Dro Sho Jam Pal Pa Wo Ji Tar Ken Pa Tang Kun Tu Sampo Te Yang Te Jin Te Te Da Kun Yi Je Su Ta Lo Ching Ge Wa Li Da Tam Che Rap Tu Ngo Sanje Kusum Ne Pe Jin La Tang Juni Min Jer Den Pe Jin La Tang Gen Dun Mi Che Dun Pe Jin La Ki Ji Tar Ngo Wa Men Lam Dra Par Sho Pa Den La Me Sha Pe Ten Pa Tang Ka Yan Yon La Te Ki Jong Wa Tang Da Jin Ma Lu So Sa Tri Jan He Yer Du Sanje Sa La Gu Par Sho Du Ji Le Jiao Chao Wei Trin Le Pa Karma Pa Ten Ten Pe Ning Po Ti Cho Tar Kun Chap Chap Chin Chun Mi Che Ta Para Pel Pel Wei Tara Shi Sho. Thank you, everyone. It's so great to see you all. Thank you for being here tonight. And we'll see you next Wednesday, same time, all right? Same time, and we'll all be here to answer questions, all right? Okay. Have fun practicing. Om Mani Padme Hum.